What are the environmental, public health factors that cause this to keep happening? How do we reduce those factors to make things safer? Advertising is the obvious one. And, it's hard. Football Index, it's hard not, because it's such a close to home example. It's hard not to see a direct connection to people in Nottingham walking around with that on their shirts in their tens of thousands, including children.
Hello and welcome to the Invisible Addiction podcast. If you're a new listener, hi. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. And of course, if you're a long-time listener of the podcast, I hope you've been keeping well. Shortly, we'll be hearing from a Labour MP and hearing his views on how to make gambling safer. But before we go any further, I'd like to make a short disclaimer and say that this is an informational podcast. If you're experiencing gambling problems, of course, I hope you relate to the stories you hear, but please do seek professional help. Links to that support can be found on the Invisible Addiction website, www.theinvisibleaddiction.com/support. Right, without further ado, let's crack on with the podcast. Okay, so joining us on the other end of the line today is the Shadow Minister of State for Public Health and Patient Safety in the UK. He's come onto the Invisible Addiction podcast to give his perspective on gambling from a public health point of view. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Nottingham North Labour MP, Alex Norris, onto the show. Alex, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, Alex. Thanks for having me. I hope everybody watching and listening is well too during these very strange times.
No, thank you very much. We're going to get straight into it. What's more important to the government, gambling taxation money or public health?
Well, this, obviously I'm in opposition, so I generally don't have very much to say about the government. I think government, do want, public health to be the priority, but they're really good at talking about it and not very good at making it the reality. So what we've seen now for 8 years is 8 years of public health cuts. Dog squeaking on his toy, sorry, next to me. So the problem with this government is it's not so much what they say, it's what they do that you've got to look at. Sure.
Just touching on your dogs there, is it your border collies that you've got there?
Yeah, 2 border collies. I might just take the toy off, Boomer. Sorry, mate. You'll have to forgive me. Sorry, he's trying to fight me for it. There's only one winner there.
Oh, yeah. Oh my goodness. So what is the difference? I mean, for people that don't know, what's the difference between, say, health and public health?
Right, okay. Well, health is kind of everything. So, when we talk about health, people think about the National Health Service, so hospitals, doctors, that sort of thing. When we're talking about public health, we're talking more about the things that kind of make us unwell and make us need those sort of services. So whether that's drugs and alcohol, gambling addiction, smoking, unhealthy weight, those sort of things, those are public health issues. So my role is set Labour Party policy alongside colleagues around how to make those kind of proactive interventions that might improve the public's health and therefore not need the health services at all, because we'd much rather that. So that's the difference there.
Yeah, great stuff. Now, I've started my podcast wrong already. Regular listeners will be thinking, but you usually ask, what about your background and experience? So Alex, would you like to, I apologise there. So would you like to kind of kick us off and just, how did you get into politics?
Yeah. Well, that's straight into the grilling. That's
yeah.
Nick Robinson. I had Nick Robinson on 7:15 last Saturday morning, and it was straight into the grilling. I thought, Nick, you could just, we could have maybe eased in with a soft one, but I quite like that. So I'm a member of Parliament. I represent my community where I live in the north bit of Nottingham, and I'm given responsibility by Keir Starmer as part of the health team and doing the public health aspects. Health's been a big part of my life. Prior to being elected to Parliament 3 and a bit years ago, I was the health lead on my council for a number of years. I also worked for Unison, which is a trade union that works in the health sector. So for me, health and public health have been a big part of my career, my life and my interest. And that's kind of how I found myself here.
I was going to say, I saw that you'd campaigned for safer was it safe standing in football? I know that you're a big Man City supporter. You said it was bad for the atmosphere. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you get to Parliament and you've got this whole world of issues, every foreign policy issue you could think about, every home affairs issue, every health issue. And if you try to do everything, you do nothing. So you try and kind of focus on a few things. And for me, I had particular interest in tackling domestic abuse. I think, men have a really responsible place in that, in leadership around that. Very interested in modern slavery, and then particularly around safe standing. Because it's something that people in my city had talked a lot about, at Nottingham Forest, and also my background of going to City. Because frankly, everyone knows, anyone listening to this podcast knows that if you go to an away game, you stand. So there's standing at football already. You also know that you score a big goal, you end up 3 rows in front of you, and it's not a very good thing. And, there'd be moments, maybe Aguero 2011, 2012, the Aguero goal ended up a long way away. I mean, Dick off Wembley 99 ended up a long way away from where I originally was. And it's not a very good state of affairs. I don't think it's as fun. So I'm hoping, we've made some real progress with the government on this, around having safe standing models, which of course work in Germany, they would work at Celtic Park. And I would love to see that rolled out in England. I think that'd be better for the game. I think that'd be better for people's enjoyment. So yeah, it's a different kind of health issue, but one I think is really important.
Yeah, no, I'm a Bournemouth fan for my sins, and we've had a few Man City links in the past. I think Mel Machin being one of them. I mean, talking about football, I mean, it's been hot in the press this week about Football Index and such like. With your links to Nottingham and Nottingham Forest being sponsored by Football Index, what are your thoughts on the whole situation?
The whole thing's really, really scary. And I say that in a way that very few things scare me. Very few things actually surprise you. In politics, you see it all. This was really scary. I mean, I'd had an interesting Football Index in the sense that they're shirt sponsors at Forest. So, I watch, certainly nowadays in lockdown, I watch every Forest game online. But I'd never really looked at the product. And I have to say, my instinct was I didn't think it was a gambling product. I remember thinking as recently as probably a couple of months ago, if we get into shirt sponsorship banning, which I think we almost certainly will do, I wonder whether that covers Football Index or not. And then this week, because at the time of recording, Football Index obviously have had that big change to their dividends, which has caused real anxiety to people on the platform. They've gone into administration subsequently. They've had the license literally about half an hour ago. Their license suspended. This is a gambling product, and I also didn't know as well. In sort of doing my reading around it, that there's this real. I don't know how I missed this. I'm normally really good on kind of cultural issues, but there's this massive subculture on Twitter of people for whom their handles are FI. All of them got FI or Football Index such and such. There's a really big culture of this, of people who thought they were traders on a platform, just as you'd think you were if you were trading kind of stock market shares. And they're now kind of in 3 places. There's a group of people whose losses have been crystallized and are now coming to terms with that, which is really significant. There's a group of people who are really, really angry. And there's a group of people who still think that this might turn a corner yet, and that, if we just expand into the Bundesliga, etc., etc. Now, I dare say when this is released, we'll know an awful lot more. And, some of the reporting and some of the concerns around, and these are only allegations at this point, but dividends being paid from the investments of others, that, again, is startling stuff. And, just looking at some of the videos from the founders, saying guaranteed yield across the market, tweeting how Zlatan Ibrahimovic has given a better return than the Bank of England over the last year. This, whatever you say, this was a gambling product that was marketed very clearly not as a gambling product. And there are going to be profound questions about how that was licensed and allowed to continue to license. And, and I say this as someone who did too, how this was missed, by a lot of people who should have known better. And that kind of shows where we are in the market at the moment. This is a market that, has all sorts of certainly because of the online elements to it, is metamorphosing in all sorts of ways, in a way that we need to keep up with, which is why obviously the review's important. It's why the online harms bill's important, because we've got to catch up. But as I say, my first instinct was quite startling, and there are a number of people who are clearly in a very serious position. And and again, so I'm going on a bit too long, Alex, but it is such interesting stuff. Reading posts that people have put on their message boards saying, I'm taking out loans to invest in this platform because they didn't think they could lose. And they kind of thought, well, the platform's only going to grow anyway because more and more people are going to want to do this. And we're in at the low level. So even if we don't make particularly brilliant strategic decisions within the platform will grow and grow our investment anyway. And that should give us all really cause for significant concern.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. My brother has been completely hooked into this. 21 years of age, took out a massive loan. The banks couldn't wait to give him a loan, and he rung me up actually this weekend, and I could just tell straight away by the tone of his voice something drastic was up. I actually thought that he'd split up with his girlfriend or whatever, but I had real concerns. He said he felt suicidal. That this is a serious issue, like you say. People have been sort of sucked into it, and the kind of the marketing around it. I again didn't think it was gambling. I know it's regulated by the Gambling Commission, but it's the use of like stocks, trades, such like his whole world has been kind of ripped apart. He feels like a complete utter failure. Do you agree that there's a high suicide risk now amongst Football Index users?
Well, I mean, I don't know that, but what I do know is that from what people are saying online, that's how they're feeling. So that should be something we're really concerned about. This is fundamentally everything we're talking about today, Alex, is a men's health issue. We know what is the greatest risk to, we're similar-ish age. I'm a little bit older than you, but what is the biggest risk to our health? What is it that's most likely to kill us? It's death by suicide, and this is a big trigger for that. So, men's health isn't something we talk about very lot, certainly younger men's health. This is exactly kind of why this is important, why I think it was important to come on your podcast, why I think your podcast is important in general, to give us that kind of spark to reach out to each other, but also to say that services that are provided have to be pitched at people like us who are under pressures like this to try and avert, something like that happening.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that. Like you've mentioned, the onlineness, the online products and such like, and the harms, and also the gambling app review. I'm sure we'll kind of weave in and out and stuff. But let's talk about lockdown briefly. I mean, with millions of people in the UK finding themselves with increased amount of time at home, amounts of time at home because of lockdown, many without jobs, and easy access to gambling from a mobile phone, in which it only takes 12 seconds to place a bet. Do you agree that lockdown is a breeding ground for gambling addiction?
Well, I mean, this will be the source of things that we're going to study for years and years. I mean, I think the early evidence doesn't suggest that things have, that people's behaviours have massively changed, but that there has been an increase. And, things like people have been going back to online poker, which perhaps they haven't been doing for some time. So things will have changed here, I think, for sure. I think about my own behaviours. Certainly, I don't think I'd ever put a bet on the Bundesliga prior to this, but the Bundesliga opened up before everyone else. So, of course, you thought, suddenly you're more interested in FC Köln than you'd ever have been before. So certainly behaviours have changed. Lockdown will have changed lots of things, and the way in which we re-emerge from it, and that kind of feel-good factor as people get back to normal again. There's a risk around that people start, that you get really, really excited and start doing things you didn't. I mean, the most important thing for me in gambling, or one of the most important things, is, and I'm an enthusiast of bookies, and the bookies part of a community. But the best bit about the bookies is they notice when your behaviour changes and they tap you on the shoulder. And in the online space, who notices when your behaviour changes? And that's where the kind of space we've got to get into, because lockdown and coronavirus is a behaviour changer for all of us. At the moment, we can't leave our houses properly. And then when we come out, what are the things we're going to want to get back to doing? We're going to want to get back to enjoying ourselves. So those are the sort of things I'm concerned about, really.
I would politely disagree with your mention of the bookies tapping on your shoulder. I mean, it never happened to me, and that was where I had a big problem with my gambling. But I do agree with what you say about how we tackle that online. So I guess the $1 million question is, how do we make gambling safer?
Well, that is it. I mean, and that's the whole purpose of the review. I think the events show with Football Index that our legislation's out of date, and that's fine because they're written in 2005. So, the internet was a thing, but app-based stuff wasn't really at all. For me, I do the public health end of things. So it's the public health end exists in two spaces. So firstly, how do you help people who have a problem, and that's with decent services. At a fundamental level, my basic belief is, very good independent services that are commissioned by an independent body that are funded by the industry. I'm pretty happy with that as a pathway, though I'm meeting with lots of groups who want to evolve that. The thing for me is the key thing is independent at every step in the chain. I'm perfectly happy for industry to pay for it, and I'm glad that we've got more out of the industry during this pandemic. But they obviously should have no say then in terms of what those services are. So that's the kind of immediate level, the today problem. The thing for me is, and this is something that we do in gambling, but actually we do across British life. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world with some of the best evolved healthcare services. And that's a really good thing. But it also means that we end up saying, okay, so you've got a broken arm, here's your plaster cast. Okay, you're dealing with mental ill health. So here's some talking therapies, here's a prescription. In this case, okay, you've got an issue with gambling, here's some gambling services, or here's some talking therapies, or here's some group work. And we do that millions and millions of times a week. And we never stop at any point to say, well, hang on a minute, why are we doing it so many times? What are the environmental public health factors that cause this to keep happening? So whether that's, our daily experiences of the advertising we see, et cetera, the messages that are fed to us, we have to get to that next level that says, okay, how do we reduce those factors to make things safer? Advertising is the obvious one. And, it's hard. Football Index, it's hard not, because it's such a close to home example. It's hard not to see a direct connection to people in Nottingham walking around with that on their shirts in their tens of thousands, including children. So that's a big problem. That's something you have to change. And that seems to me something that's pretty clearly going to come out of the Act. So for me, to answer that question, how do we make things safer? We have to de-escalate those environmental factors that kind of both normalize, certainly to younger people, some of these things, but also to those who are on the cusp or in addiction, that mean that you can't escape that relentless barrage. And, I'm always very conscious about the emails I get, how many of them are from platforms. And that actually, if you were on the edge, or if you traditionally, you've struggled with this before and you've just had a bad day, what the impact of that is. And, so that's why I want to see out of the Act and the Act review and out of the harms bill, de-escalation of all those things. And, that's easy to say and hard to do. But again, we've got to really centre experts by experience on this to say, what is it? Because I know what it is that pushes me to do things. But for those, with really lived experience of this, what was it that kept pushing you back when you wanted to come out? And there'll be, some of the stuff you read in the newspapers, very aggressive examples, whether it's, the so-called VIP experiences that actually didn't seem to be about, perhaps VIP and big bettors, but more likely vulnerable ones. So those are really obvious things. And I think those can be done quite easily. But what are the broader environmental factors that were doing that and causing that? And those are the things we've got to get into.
I agree with you there. I think we've got to it's sort of like follow the money, as it were, and come up to the top. So, I mean, talking about the Gambling Act review, I sort of posed some questions to my followers on Twitter and just sort of said, we're not going to be interviewing Alex Norris. One chap, I hope I'm going to get his Twitter handle right, @private 963752991. There we go. He says, why have they put someone who was pro-gambling to oversee the Gambling Act review? He can't remember his name, but I will know it's John Whittingdale. Why have they put him in charge of the Gambling Act review when he has a history of voting against stronger regulation of the industry? There we go. What are your thoughts?
Well, he's a government minister. I mean, my strong view would be that he shouldn't be doing it because we should be having a Labour government. But the point at which, people vote for a Conservative government, well, of course, the thing is, if you went down the line of ministers in that department, they will all have pretty much the same voting record. So the issue I don't think is perhaps the individual, but rather the administration.
Okay. And where we're going to go with this? Where we're going to go? I mean, sticking on the Gambling Act review, Gambling Insight asks, what is Alex's take on the BGC's Betting Gaming Council's attempted politicisation of the Gambling Act review debate in recent days? Do they feel there is a risk? Do they feel there is the risk the standards lobbying body has lost its focus?
No, I don't. That's certainly not my experience. I don't think the BGC have politicised it. I think it's a highly politicised space already. This is something that is a parliamentary process, the review fundamentally. So the politics is all in it. The thing about it actually is that it cuts across party. This is not one of those simple, at the moment we're having significant arguments about NHS pay, and that tends to split down party lines. The Labour Party, we think it should be increased. The Tory Party, they don't. Whereas this cuts across all parties. So I don't think it's politicised any more than it already would be. The key thing for me is two things really. One, as I say, we need to find a way to make sure that it isn't just politicians making the kind of the setting the weather for the conversation, because actually our experiences of betting and gambling are can be very different to the rest of the population. So let's make sure we're getting the real view of the experts into it. But secondly, and I know how naive I sound when I say this, and I don't care. And I know there'll be people who roll their eyes, but sometimes you just have to say this because you think it's the right thing to say. I'd like us to get to a less aggressive conversation, particularly in the online space, about this, because the conversation very quickly can become quite unpleasant. And I know that these are really important and issues that people have really strong views about. We have to try and find a way to have that conversation without kind of assuming that other people have bad motivations or terrible people, or if you do think that about them, without then having to shout and swear at them. And I know that that's what social media is to a certain extent, but on something as important as this, if it becomes a tribal issue between those who don't want particularly much change at all and those who want significant change, then we'll get nowhere at all. So that's what I kind of hope. Politicization, we won't be able to avoid. Being really unpleasant about it, I feel like we've always got a choice about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think if we can all, maybe I'm an idealist, can't get my words out, but if we could all kind of come together, that would be surely the best thing.
And that's not to say that we're going to agree on everything, but that we can have an evidence-based conversation, both in terms of the quantitative evidence, but also the evidence of people's experiences, and have the conversation based on those facts. You've got to be better than kind of just shouting at each other.
Okay, no, I agree. Okay, so another question. This is not, well, it's slightly related to a tweet that I got, but in 2019, Denise Coates, the chief executive of Bet365, earned £1.3 million for every working day, 9,500 times the average UK salary. For someone who called for an end to poverty in their first parliamentary speech, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, we live in a market economy. Now, I have to say, I'm not sure anybody's worth that. That's a lot of nurses' salaries per day. The point, of course, that she would make was that she also pays an awful lot of tax in this country too. But I don't. At the end of the day, I don't think whether or not the executives of big gambling organisations earn big money or not, I don't think would make a massive amount of difference to the harm made. So I'm more focused at that end that says, on a public health basis, what is the harm in this country? And how can we set services to help those who need it? And what can we do to set a more preventative environment? I think if we just start fighting each other about executive pay, I think, frankly, it would be a bit of a sideshow.
Okay. I mean, talking of let's dive into the public health part of the conversation, I suppose. So, do you agree that prevention is better than cure?
Yes, I think it's better for the individual because we'd rather they didn't have to go through a traumatic experience, and it's better for the collective because generally it's much cheaper prevention's cheaper than curative services. So in principle, yes. Or the problem with that, it's often easy to talk about but harder to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, I'm usually much more conversational, but I've had this sort of I've only given myself this pressure today, which is like, I'm interviewing an MP. I better do it justice. And at the end of the
No, I wouldn't
day,
worry about that.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah,
I'm just, I think we probably find I'm not that much different to you, to be honest. So,
no. No, I was gonna say, I just, suddenly thought, I got to a sort of adopt a Jeremy Paxman sort of stance, and again, my regular listeners will be thinking, you've changed, dude. What's going on? What's going on?
You've already told me you think I'm wrong once, so keep doing that if you think I am. It's, and listeners will do, and my colleagues do sometimes too. So yeah.
Okay. By the way, again, for the listeners' benefit, I attended the Gamble Aware conference recently, and you spoke at the beginning, and I just thought, yeah, this guy is speaking sense. I like this guy. Let's see if I can get him on the podcast. And amazingly, you agreed, which is great for someone that's sat in their spare bedroom recording a podcast. It sort of never fails to ceases, never ceases to amaze me. But I suppose let's talk about treatment in a way. The thing with gambling addiction is that, like, not many of us will get treatment. Only in 2013 it was kind of classified the same as alcohol and drugs, as it were. So, and again, stats here say that 3% of people with gambling disorder receive sort of treatment. How do we change that figure? How do we reduce stigma? How do we change that figure, in your opinion?
Yeah, because I've seen that number, and that really concerns me. And if we saw that about anything else, any other health condition, we'd think, oh, that's a really big problem. Of course, we're not going to resolve things, or of course, there's going to be a lot of harm caused if we can't get people into treatment. For me, there's a couple of things. First of all, it is a cultural thing, and reducing stigma is the number one thing. I strongly feel you and I, and certainly I suspect the people who tune into your podcast have a responsibility, because, the people that we're talking about that are greatest risk are us, and they're our friends, and they're in our group chats, or they're on the train with us on our way to an away game. And we've got to be able to have conversations about it in a non-judgmental way, in a way that supports our friends, because we all know that when it gets to the point when it's too late, we'd have done anything, or we just wish we'd known, and we could have done something. And that just kind of is how it is. So we all have to be braver about it. And I say this to myself as much as anybody else, about having that conversation with our friends when they see changed behaviours, or we see people in a difficult place. And so there's a big men's health conversation in there as a start that we can all be leaders in. And as I say, I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to listeners there. But also, it's got to be something on the, that's on the demand side. If we were talking about, running a business, that's the demand side for people wanting to use services. But on the supply side, there must be something about the services that mean that actually people don't want to use them. So is it because, by the time you enter the National Treatment Service, you have to have got to, significant crisis levels? So what is it about? What could be those earlier interventions? I'm a big believer in peer-to-peer work. I'm a big believer in talking therapies more generally. So, but we know in this country, we don't have a very good regime for talking therapies. We know child and adolescent mental health services are really hard to get into for when people have a mental ill health in their early stages, and then that can set a lifetime of not really being able to get into services. But we also know when it comes to the peer-to-peer work, which is often the most effective stuff, I've no doubt that listening to your podcast, whether that's true today or not, I'm not sure, but in general, listening to your podcast is a therapeutic intervention for your listeners, and for those who then follow you online and then talk to other people, that'll be a really big part of their ongoing recovery. So how can we promote that and support that? Because actually, we know there's an awful lot of people and great organisations who are doing things on a shoestring, and actually they're averting a lot of harm, and they could do even more. But we've got to support them, and rather than kind of taking advantage a bit of their good nature and the fact that they're doing this not because they want to be funded to do it, but because they think it's really important, well, let's get support into those services. And I say particularly that peer-to-peer stuff, getting people together. For all the bad elements of the pandemic, we're now so much more adept at technology now. I personally, I don't think I'd want to access kind of my group work through a screen. I like see people and the energy of other people, but actually that might work for others too. So, let's get into those support services to try and make sure that there's a real range of things, so that if you've taken that really courageous first step to say that actually you've recognised a problem and that you want to do something about it, then there's something for you that looks like you and looks like something you'd access. And so it's a bit, as I say, it's a bit of demand and it's a bit of supply, and we can all play a role in that. But as always, it does come back to the government of the day, because we're all people with our individual power, and when we come together, we have a lot of collective power. But similarly, the budget's a £700 billion annual operation, so we ought to be able to find our place in there for this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, sorry to go off script. Just to let you know, I've abandoned the questions. It's just going to be a conversation now.
I've talked you out of them. I've talked you all out of them.
No, nice one, mate. Nice one. I mean, the thing is, like, you look at some laws, for example. I mean, where I live here in Portsmouth, there's an arcade around the corner, Seaside Arcade, and it was just amazing that you could go down the arcade and children can bet on fruit machines, right? And I was like, okay, how do we allow this? I mean, why is this? Like, I don't know. I'm posing it as a question, a rhetorical question, but because I'm just so shocked. Like, how do we, as responsible adults, as a responsible country, how do we allow kids to bet on fruit machines in arcade? Why?
Yeah, I mean, because I often think about this, because I'll be really honest with you and with listeners. After Gamble Aware, I had some people say some nice things about what I said, and then some people who really weren't happy with what I said. And whatever the rights and wrongs, that's the nature of kind of life in politics. But it did make me challenged to think of some of my perceptions and my experience with gambling, which starts with going to Blackpool as a kid, and really as a kid, and playing on those things. It starts with some of my happiest memories with my granddad. My dad died when I was very young, so my granddad was my closest positive male role model. And a lot of those positive days were with the racing post, circling things, sometimes even putting those bets on for him. And I look back at those with real fondness. But then you think about that, there's nothing really normal about that at all, and that isn't actually the environment we want for young people. So you play that forwards. I think things are much better now than they were. You couldn't be in bookies in the same way. However, I then think about another big part of kind of my life and what I enjoy, which is playing FIFA. And then you think about FIFA Ultimate Team, and you think about who plays that, and there's a reality as a 37-year-old who presumably, though happily you don't know this, but I presumably lose to 12 and 13-year-olds on FIFA at times. But we're playing the same things on those packs, and that is something real, that we have to get into that space that, it's a really challenging one, I have to say. And that gets back to the point I'm making around, let's look at the environment that we create and what behaviors that creates in us and what that pushes us to do to try and set a safe space. I mean, I'll be the first to say, I'm not an abolitionist. I'm really not. So for me, it's about trying to have the safest possible environment you can, and particularly around children and the normalisation at an early age. And as I say, I see it in myself. But I still see it around today. And those are really thorny questions that we've got to get into the evidence on, and really, kind of tease out where we go next, because the world's moving at such quick pace. And, these things explode, and they're things that there'll be things we haven't even heard about today that in 2-3 years will be massive things. They'll harness a new aspect of the internet. And, we have to try and be agile and keep up with that in a way that doesn't just say smash the machines. And that's your challenge, really.
Absolutely. I mean, again, stats flying around. 55,000 young people aged 11 to 16 addicted to gambling. I mean, I told my girlfriend last night. I mean, she was like, what? It's ridiculous. It's crazy. I mean, I'm a big believer in that the perception that you give, or perception, can create behavior, and then behavior can kind of shape society. So you look at that, and you then, you talk about the normalisation to young people, especially through like football sponsorships and gambling adverts. I mean, do you agree that they should be banned, gambling adverts or shirt sponsorships on football shirts and such like?
Yeah, I mean, we're still kind of doing our response to the Gambling Act review, and it's more of this. If I'm honest, not my department, because I do the public health elements of things.
Mm.
But I think I'll be brave enough to venture out to say that shirt sponsorship has had its day. I mean, it's a couple of things. One, as I say, it's the constant. It's that it's that harm around children. You can't have children wandering around wearing gamble, as walking billboards of gambling. That's the sort of, you always wonder, you think, you look back at things 50 years ago and think, I can't believe they ever did that. And then you think, well, I wonder what are the things we do today that will look back in 50 years' time and think, God, I can't believe they ever did that. That's one of those things. And then, that's an easy one, frankly. So I can make us bang the tubs as lazy politics to a certain extent, because that's so obvious. We've then got a much harder question around advertising. And again, I think a lot of the stuff that's changed in the pandemic around the whistle to whistle stuff, I think is really good. The question is actually, I think, more in the online space, and that is a lot harder. And because online, adverts are incredibly sophisticated, and they're pushed to certain people at certain times in certain ways based on certain behaviors you've made in the past. That's incredibly sophisticated. It's not just buying up time on one of the TV channels. It's an entirely different world. And how we're going to get into that in a place that protects and avoids harm, that for me is the kind of biggest question coming out of both the review and the online harms bill that we've been waiting for 3 years now.
Alex, again, just to pick you up something with a fine tooth comb there.
Yeah,
I just want to challenge you on that, because I mean, the whistle to whistle ban, I mean, that's kind of spouted out. But I mean, the thing is, the bombardment of advertisements on the perimeter boards, on the shirts themselves, like, that can't be true. That's literally not true, because it's not a whistle to whistle ban, because it's there during the 90 minutes. So it's frustrating to put it mildly.
I get that, and I kind of accept that. But I also do think, when progress has been made, which it has been on elements, I get it. It's not the entirety. We should also take that as a good thing, bank it and move on. And so that's kind of the point I'm making there. But I do get it, and that is again indicative of this broader environment that we live in, that bombards us with messages about all sorts of things.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, going back, I mean, I know you said earlier, for example, like, you don't have a big problem with, say, for example, like a gambler where, being funded by the industry, or in your opinion, you'd like to make it kind of independent. You don't mind it being funded by the industry and such like. I mean, I suppose I've still got a little bit of an issue with that, the industry funding it. I don't necessarily agree with that at all, really. I mean, what do you make of, I'm going to mispronounce his name, the chap who runs or heads the betting gaming council? He called Matt's our cousin Roulette Boy on Twitter. Do you think? I mean, should this guy even be allowed anywhere near Twitter? I mean, to put it mildly. I mean, should he even be in charge if he's taunting people that have had gambling addictions?
Yeah, well, as I understand, he's apologised for that, and he had to. You can't, as I say, it's indicative of an online conversation that can get quite vicious and personal very quickly. So no, that sort of thing shouldn't be happening. Obviously, it's for the BGC and its members to say who they want to lead it. And they have. I believe they've made significant efforts in the pandemic to do things differently. Now, that's not to say we're not going to say we want to go further in the review, but I'd rather that than an industry that was just trying to stick its fingers in the ear and pretend nothing was happening. So, yeah, but I mean, I get that. On the personal stuff, that's just, as I say, not for me.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, where am I going to go? I'm not going to look at my questions. Oh, I am looking at my questions. Okay, suicides. God, yeah, heavy topic. So, again, research has shown that gambling addicts are 3 to 4 times more likely to take their own lives than other addicts. How do we prevent gambling-related suicide?
Well, I mean, that is a question without a single factor answer. Suicide's exceptionally complicated, but one of the kind of the profound sadness, as I say, in men our age. So for me, it's about you go kind of through those stages from the very biggest to the most individual, getting to an environment that means that if you choose to stop and don't want to do this anymore, you're not bombarded in a way that means that once that actually you can't escape. So that's really important. You then get down to kind of to a more general level, which is the role where I think you come in and I come in and we all come in about being great mates and understanding those changes and not doing the whole kind of, oh, come on, let's just have one more, that sort of thing. And then down to having services that people want to access that are really great. And the point you make about who funds that is a perfectly valid one, and one to an extent I have quite a bit of agreement in. We don't say that with drugs and alcohol services. We don't say that with services relating to healthy weight. It's not paid for by a levy on industry. I guess my point would be that's something that's grown historically, and you can pull the pin out of that and say don't fund it, but you're then back to funding it through general taxation, and I'm not sure you'd end up with more money for it. So actually, I think we might have come to a bit of a kind of we've found a level that perhaps you wouldn't have drawn it on a blank piece of paper, but I actually probably wouldn't mess around with it too much, my personal view. But yeah, as I say, then you've got to have those services. People have got to want to use them, and they've got to be as effective as possible, again, based on evidence, information, and the best clinical outcomes. And that's how you set the best environment, really, to try and squeeze this sadness out.
So, typical kind of human geography question. That's what I studied at university. But is it top down or bottom up? Who's taking the lead on this? Is it the government or is the local authorities? I mean, I'm a bit confused as to who's taking the lead on setting agendas and things like that.
My view is that on an issue of this significance, of national significance, it's to be led at a national level, by the government of the day, to set the right culture, to set the right environment, and to make sure that services are funded. Now, on the other side to that, by instinct, I believe in devolution. I'd much rather my local council did things than the national government did things relating to my community, because they know it better than. But on something of this nature, I think it's so cross-cutting across communities that fundamentally it has to start at a national level. The thing for me that we're not very good at, whether it's about this issue or about public health issues in general, is getting the rich views and understanding of people who are experts by experience. So there's too many, and I will fall into this category, I dare say, from time to time. There's too many politicians booting off about what their views are about things, and not enough listening to people who are experts by experience about their lives and what it was, because that's the thing that's really crucial. What it was that either did or didn't help them change the behaviours in the way that they wanted to do. Because I'm a big believer in, I say this as I'm a Labour Party MP. We lose elections. We've lost 4 in a row now. We're clearly not very good at politics. I say that openly, and in full knowledge that this will be seen. And the thing that annoys me about that is the thing about politics is, as well as being very complicated, lots of complex issues. If you listen long enough, you stop talking for a while and listen long enough to people, they'll generally tell you what they want. And again, I think this is the sort of issue that if we stop kind of shouting at each other at a national level and listen long enough to people with experience of this, we'll get most of the answers out that way. And so it's that kind of uneasy mix. But it's got to start at a national level, because this is like, this is big stuff. And we wouldn't, if we just said, right, we'll take a Nottingham approach to this, we won't crack it. So that for me, I think it has to start there.
Yeah. So what are the sort of things that you get kind of emailed in by your constituents?
Don't get much from my constituents. And that I have to. It's really important that I say that. I represent one of the poorer constituencies in the country, an urban constituency. So I get less volume than I would do perhaps if I was in perhaps one of the more affluent constituencies nearby. So I already get kind of lesser. But on this issue, I don't get an awful lot. It's only obviously when you say things nationally, and obviously when this I'll know when this podcast has gone live. You don't have to tell me, because then the emails will start coming in. So that tends to be people more generally across the country with their views, which is great. As again, I would always want that. I hope they will start from the fact that I'm not working in good faith, even if they think I'm wrong, and I may well be wrong. But the best thing to do, certainly if a national politician is wrong about something, is to persuade them. And I'm always up for a better argument than the one I've posed if I'm not right, or if I've strayed too far away from the evidence. So so yeah, that's the sort of volume that I get from people. I mean, I sometimes feel, though not necessarily on this issue, but I sometimes feel that, and maybe this is why we lose so many elections, but we have a responsibility to disappoint people equally. Often on foreign policy issues. I used to be a spokesperson for us on international development issues. So whenever I talked about Israel and Palestine, I would always manage to completely displease both sides. And I often thought that I probably was in the right place at that point. But that's not necessarily one of those issues. But I am well used to. I've been a spokesperson for the Labour Party on health issues throughout a pandemic. So whenever I log off from that call and open my emails, I will get emails saying, half a dozen people saying, why aren't you backing the national effort more strongly? And half a dozen emails saying, we've got the biggest death toll in Europe and the worst recession. Why aren't you hitting the government harder? And again, I feel our job is often to exist on that knife edge. So again, I think my lot generally is to just, the one thing I'd never want to do, and the one thing I kind of, again, maybe this makes me a bad politician, I never play in the galleries, and just to think, well, there's a group of people there that I'm just going to say the things that they want to hear, and then I'll demonize this other group of people in order to get support from that group of people. And there's too much of that in politics, I think, and I don't think that that's leadership. But as I say, I'm part of a political project that loses relentlessly. So maybe my judgment and my strategy on this stuff isn't very good.
Who knows? I mean, it's yeah, who knows? I mean, it's interesting because I just think, I mean, with this, it's like, how much do you put your agenda forward, or how much is there you've got to toe the party line? I mean, what is the Labour views kind of? What is the Labour kind of party line, there we go, on gambling and preventing gambling related harm?
Well, I mean, I think you'd expect me to say, and it's a bit kind of a truism, but we want an environment where there's less harm. We're not prohibitionists, but we understand that the harm is devastating to families and communities, so we don't want that to happen. I mean, you'll see when we publish our response to the review, you'll kind of see in the nuts and bolts how we think we get to that. And I'm afraid I can't quite do the spoilers on that at the moment. But to answer the first part of your question, the kind of how you formulate that, it does start in your own experiences and your own views. It just inevitably does. However, you have to try and weed that out and try and kind of balance that out, rather than weed that out, sorry, by the evidence. And that's by meeting with, interested groups. That's by reading, the academic research to try and get to a balanced point. And we all have our biases, whether conscious or subconscious ones. And I'm always mindful of my own in that sense. So you have to try and balance that out by listening as widely as possible. And, that's why I say yes to everything. Saying yes to this podcast was a very obvious thing to me, because it was just as simple as you asked. So unless it's an obvious, clear hate platform, I will always say yes. And similarly, every group that gets in touch with me, and that includes the big companies too, if they get in touch with me, I meet with them to hear what they say. And that doesn't mean I go away and agree with it all, but it doesn't mean we always have easy conversations. But similarly, those organisations that are activists and campaigning, I'll meet. I always say yes, and to try and get a balanced picture. And that's not to say, therefore, you just try and take a bit from column A and a bit from column B and come up with something that'll kind of, because actually there's times when these things are fundamentally opposed to each other, and then there's times you have to come down on kind of one side of the argument. But I try and do that at the end rather than at the beginning. I think it's a better approach.
Yeah, I mean, just, are you okay for I mean, we've got a few minutes left. Got a few minutes left. I mean, just on that, for example, like in the Gamble Aware conference, they said, there's 340,000 people with gambling disorder. Yet a YouGov poll says there's 1.4 million. So it's like, is that because Gamble Aware have got a kind of hidden agenda there? They don't want to make the figure too big because of, they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, as it were.
No, I don't think that comes from a place of bad faith. I think that comes from using one particular data source. I mean, if I had my time again, I wouldn't have used that number on that day, because I hadn't actually quite grasped just how how significantly contested that number is. The answer is obviously going to be on somewhere on that scale, but I think GambleAware are trying to use that evidence to underplay or overplay in the interest of making sure they're still funded? No, I fundamentally just don't believe that to be true. But it is important that we have a conversation based on the evidence, and that we understand that sometimes these numbers are disputed, and that there I don't want to say alternative facts, because that's a whole different argument, but there is other evidence available that suggests different things, and we owe it to each other to have an honest conversation based on that broad range of facts.
No, brilliant. Okay, so my final question is actually the first question that I started with, which was, again, what do you think is more important to the government? Do you think it's money, or do you think it's public health?
Well, as I say, I'm no supporter of this government. My job is literally to oppose them. So I don't think we do enough to create a healthy world, which is why we have such significant disparities and inequalities in health in this country, which has shown during COVID to be devastating. You live in a poorer community, you're twice as likely to have died from COVID. If you're from a black or Asian, particularly Pakistani or Bangladeshi background, you're 50% more likely to have died. So, we live in an unequal country, and our best tools to tackle that is funding through public health. And the government have cut that every year for 8 years. So it tells you about their priorities. So that's my view. But as I say, I'm an opposition politician. Of course, I would say that. So I would hope people would try and assemble a broad range of facts. But until we start investing in our nation's health, we're going to keep getting the health outcomes that we're getting at the moment. I think that's at least obvious.
I think that's a good place to finish, Alex. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap things up?
No, I hope you will have seen. I hope listeners will have seen that I've given a pretty unvarnished account of where I am on stuff. I know that I won't always have given answers that please people, but we're genuinely trying to get to the best position on this. I certainly am. So if there are things that I'm wrong on, tell me. But ideally, stop. You don't even have to be particularly polite. Certainly, people shouldn't feel the need to be deferential. Just generally don't start with an expletive in the first sentence. I'll still read it, I do, but it's just better if not.
Yes, nice gentlemanly conduct. Well, Alex, thank you so much for taking your time to come on the podcast. It's been insightful.
Good. That could be a dangerous euphemism, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
No. And I hope. Well, do I hope Man City win the league? I don't know how I feel about that, but yeah, you guys are riding it out, right? Yeah.
Well, it should be. Yeah, we're well placed now. Yeah, we beat Southampton. You got to at least enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, the scum. I live in Portsmouth, and I support Bournemouth, and we both hate Southampton.
That's the one thing in common. You definitely don't like Southampton.
Oh dear. Well, Alex, thanks so much, and
great. Yeah.
I will speak to you soon.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Lots to take away from Alex's views. What were your thoughts? Do you agree that gambling sports sponsorship should be banned? What about the Gambling Act review? Should the government take tougher action? Let me know. Let's start a conversation. Feel free to drop me a comment on YouTube, message on social media, or get in touch confidentially with me via email, info@theinvisibleaddiction.com. In the final episode of The Invisible Addiction, I'll be speaking to Paul Buck, CEO and founder of Epic Risk Management, the world's leading independent gambling harm minimization consultancy. Really looking forward to hearing his story. In the meantime, thanks once again, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.